Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Carolyn Ward, and I'm the CEO of the Blue Ridge Parkway Foundation. And welcome to this month's edition of the Insiders Report. And I am so excited for this one. I am a little bit of a novice birder myself, and am so excited that Curtis Smalling is joining us from the Audubon of North Carolina. So Curtis is going to be talking to us about birds and birding the Blue Ridge Parkway. And before I introduce Curtis, just a couple technology sort of housekeeping things. Down at the bottom of your screen, if you move your mouse across your screen, you'll see some little icons that will pop up, and one is Q&A. So if you have any questions as we go through the webinar, please ask them. And we'll get to as many of those questions at the end of the presentation as possible. There's also a chat box where we'll be sharing some links of some information that you may find useful later to help you in birding along the Blue Ridge Parkway. And there's also a live transcript of the presentation that should be showing up at the bottom of your screen. You can move that anywhere else on your screen, or you can click on live transcript and you can turn it off. And then finally, we will be making a recording of this webinar available on our website, on our YouTube channel, so you can share it with others and watch it later. If you are signed up for the webinar, you will receive this link automatically in 2 days in your email. But for those of you that want to share this with others, you can let them know in a couple days it will be up on our website. So once again, thanks everyone for joining us. We're joined today by Curtis Smalling. Curtis is a graduate of Appalachian State University. He has a BA in biology and also a master's in Appalachian Studies. He's a lifelong birder who was introduced to birds by his grandfather. So he's spent a lifetime looking at birds, starting with the purple martin. Curtis is the Director of Conservation with Audubon of North Carolina. He has been there for about 20 years and serves with several other groups throughout the state, including the North Carolina State Scientific Council Bird Committee, and also serves on the steering committee for the Bird Atlas effort that's taking place in North Carolina. He's been an author and writer of several publications, peer-reviewed papers, spends his life's work studying birds. So we are so excited for Curtis to join us this morning. And Curtis, I'm going to turn it over to you so I can learn more about how to be a better birder.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. Really appreciate everybody's time today. It's a nice day outside, so thank you for taking some time this morning to be inside and learning about birds. As Carolyn said, I'm a lifelong birder, and one of the reasons for that is, birds are about our most accessible form of wildlife that we encounter every day. Birds communicate with each other the same way that we do. I often, if you see me in person, I'll be walking around waving my hands while I talk. Try to minimize that on the screen here, but birds communicate with each other through sight and sound, which is how humans communicate with each other. And so we notice birds compared to other groups of animals that are hiding from us and that kind of stuff. Birds are kind of in our face all the time. And so they're a great group of animals to get out and to study and to learn about. And fortunately, the Parkway gives us amazing access to those birds as well. So as we go through today, I want to talk about just a couple of key points. Obviously, this is a short presentation and there's a lot of birds and a lot of Parkway. But we'll try to hit the highlights and also give you some tips and some resources toward the end that can help make your bird watching a little bit more enjoyable, hopefully. So the Southern Appalachian region, if you will, the part where the Parkway traverses the mountains from Virginia all the way into North Carolina, is globally recognized as a hotspot of biodiversity. This map is just a representation of where some of the most diverse parts of our country are in terms of its animal life. And in the Appalachians, it's everything from plants to fish to salamanders to even birds. And so the Parkway gives us access to this amazing resource. Stretching the length of the spine of the Southern Appalachians, it really puts us in close proximity to this diversity. And so birds reflect that. We have birds from farther north, we have birds from farther south. In fact, we have over 250 species of birds are documented from the Parkway, probably a little bit more than that. And approximately 125 of those breed along the Parkway, mostly during the summer months, although we do have a few outside of that. If you were thinking about your neighborhood or your place where you live, basically at the county level, most locations in the Appalachian Mountains have about 225 species of birds that use that kind of landscape every year between the breeders, the migrants, and the wintering species. Again, about 75 to 100 breeding species will typically be found within a county, say. And so your checklist can get pretty big if you're birding along the Blue Ridge Parkway. Many of these birds, like this Canada warbler here, are at the southern limit of their breeding range. It's one of the things that adds to the diversity of birds along the Parkway. This is a range map for Canada warbler. The pink parts that you see and reddish parts are the breeding range. And you can see that finger that extends down the Appalachians. If you look in a bird field guide, you're going to see this pattern replicated with a lot of our species, where the elevation of the Parkway pulls these species down. If you've had programs on everything from salamanders to snails to wildflowers, you hear the same idea, right? That the mountains pull these northern species down farther south. And really, for us, the Parkway diversity is driven by this elevation, right? All the way from almost 7,000 feet, all the way down to below 1,000 feet in parts of its course. That elevational change really drives this diversity and gives us lots of opportunities for kind of high elevation specialists, but also birds that occur more widespread across the whole Southeast. A good example of this are some of the thrushes that we have along the Parkway. This is a wood thrush singing. Wood thrush tend to be a little bit lower elevation, still in dense woods, singing a really pretty flute-like song up to about 4,000 feet. Once we move above 4,000 feet, you run into its cousin, the veery. Sounds kind of like a spaceship landing, that kind of spiral call. And the veery call, often given early in the morning and late in the evening, is indicative of these kind of forests in the 4,000 to 5,000 foot range, right? They tend to be in that kind of mid-elevation space. If we get up into the spruce fir, they're replaced by hermit thrush. And hermit thrush are most highest elevation of these special thrushes that live along the Parkway. So if you're in the balsams, for instance, or along the flanks of Grandfather Mountain, Mount Mitchell, you'll hear the hermit thrush up in those highest forests. This pattern is kind of replicated where we have other species that are just found at the highest elevations. And a lot of those species are those warblers, like the Canada warbler that I showed you earlier, that extend their range into the Southern Appalachians and aren't found in other parts of North Carolina or Virginia. Things like magnolia warbler that likes kind of spruce-dominated wetlands, to goldenwing warblers that like the kind of shrubby open shrubland habitats that we find on bald edges, for instance, or places where logging might have occurred in the past or abandoned farm fields. Both of these are rare along the Blue Ridge Parkway, but they're part of the reason that people come to the Parkway. We have about 25 species of warblers that nest along the Parkway and another half dozen or so that occur as migrants regularly. And so warblers really drive a lot of the birder traffic, if you will, along the Parkway. There are a number of species and they're all colorful, sound pretty, things like Blackburnian warbler, black-throated blue, but also black-throated green, worm-eating warbler, Swainson's warblers, a whole list of really spectacular warblers that are really common in the mountains. Fortunately for us, most of the ones that are going to breed with us are the first arrivals in the spring. And so the migrants that follow them of those same species are a little bit later. That means a lot of these guys show up for us right before leaf out. And that's an important factor to consider when you're traveling the Parkway. Come early in the spring, third, fourth week of April, first week of May. get up high, not many leaves. You can see a lot of these guys a lot better than you can later in the summer. There's a number of other species though that are well known for being in Western North Carolina and Western Virginia. Across most of the rest of those states, we don't get a lot of these small flycatchers, the impidinax flycatchers as we call them. So the Southern Appalachians have really good diversity of these birds. So least flycatcher, willow flycatcher, Acadian flycatcher, yellow-bellied flycatcher, rarely in Virginia as a breeder, but occurs across the region as a migrant. All these small flycatchers singing their sneezy kind of Fitzbues and pizzas and all those calls add to that diversity as well. Now, a number of other birds are kind of high elevation specialists, right? That occur just kind of above 3,000 feet as breeders, or some like the northern saw-whet owl, even higher, kind of above 4,500 feet, typically associated with spruce and fir. These high elevation specialists often are fairly rare for us, like saw-whets. And it's a good point, I think, for me to pause a second and just mention that the Blue Ridge Parkway is a national park unit. And you technically are required to have a research permit to use playback for any of these birds. Birders today with apps on their phone and everything else are really quick to use playback to try to lure birds for a closer look. In some settings, in some circumstances, that's not very detrimental to the birds, but during breeding season in particular, it can become a problem. And with millions of visitors visiting the parkway, if we have just a handful of spots for birds like northern saw-whet owl, cerulean warbler, those kinds of birds, they can get taped out pretty quickly where they won't respond. They may even move their territories because they can't find all of those rivals that they keep hearing all the time. So the best rule of thumb is to not use playback on the Blue Ridge Parkway, again, unless you're conducting research under a research permit with the Park Service. But a lot of these high elevation birds are highly specialized to particular habitat types, whether it's spruce and fir or northern hardwood forest. So things like yellow-bellied sapsucker that are widespread in the southeast during the winter only nest at these higher elevations in the Southern Appalachians. But we also have a lot of birds like red-breasted nuthatch, golden-crowned kinglet, brown creeper, a number of species, rose-breasted grosbeak, that all like this kind of northern hardwood spruce fir forest to nest in. Now they'll be widespread as migrants, and you can expect to see them at lower elevations during spring and fall migration. But if you want to find them nesting and singing, you need to be in these higher elevations. It's not all about deep forest though on the Blue Ridge Parkway. You know, it does cut through some of the best, most intact forests that we have in the east, but it also traverses a lot of kind of mixed use agricultural land, places with a long history of European settlement and Native American land management. So when you're in Virginia or kind of Northwest North Carolina, you see a lot of Christmas tree farms, a lot of open ag, a lot of residential areas as well. And so that also adds to the diversity because some birds obviously like more open habitats. You know, we think about habitat usually in kind of broad strokes. It's grass or it's forest or whatever. But what we find with birds is that they like to pick a particular kind of subtype, if you will, or a specialized habitat within those broader habitats. Let's look at a couple of examples of forest birds. So eastern towhee, who most of you know, common feeder bird often, sometimes in yards, but they like a little bit of canopy cover. Here's his drink your tea. Great bird to learn by song. The drink your tea is very recognizable, but they like this kind of disturbed forest or edge habitats. Compare that to an eastern wood pewee who likes dense forest, but with canopy gaps, right? He wants those kind of gaps in the forest to forage. Another one of our flycatchers. Or a hooded warbler, one of the most common warblers along the parkway. Likes a closed canopy, but with a dense understory. This kind of strong weed-o. He does it one more time. You'll hear this in rhododendron thickets, shrub thickets underneath forest cover, all up and down the parkway, and kind of at all elevations up to about 4,000 feet. Indigo bunting's another favorite, a widespread bird, but easy to find along the parkways. Check especially at overlooks, any open areas, ag fields. They'll be in dense forests, but they like kind of a big gap opening. He'll sing his couplet song, this kind of cheer, cheer, here, here. I prefer sweet, sweet, chewy, chewy, chicken, chicken as my mnemonic, but a great bird that you'll see up and down the parkway. Ovenbird is a common warbler species in our forest with its strong teacher, teacher, teacher call. They like a forest with very little understory. So as you're traveling the parkway and you see these kind of what we would call glades, right, where you have a big forest patch, but not much understory, it's a great place to stop and look for ovenbirds. Again, this kind of specialized habitat within the forest itself will yield you a much longer checklist of the birds that you might see. So look for those subtle differences in the forest. Now, it's not all about forest. As I said before, these habitats that are not forested also host a lot of birds, like red-winged blackbird in small wetlands and ag fields. We even have some grassland specialists along the parkway, although big chunks of grassland are more common in Virginia than they are in the North Carolina section. But birds like Vesper sparrow, a high elevation species found along balds and large tracts of grassland. We also have bobolink along the parkway in a few spots, bamboo gap in North Carolina, a few spots up near the meadows of Dan in Virginia. But birds like field sparrow and grasshopper sparrow, eastern meadowlark do occur along the parkway. Probably not as commonly as the kind of forest associated birds, but it adds to that diversity of the parkway. We also get a fair mix of the kind of suburban, if you will, or kind of birds that do well where people live. So things like cedar waxwings, northern cardinals, Carolina wrens, gray catbirds, all those species occur in really good abundance along the parkway, where we have these kind of mixed habitats along the parkway. So look for those as well. Again, a good spring morning in the parkway during breeding season, you should yield 60 to 100 species over the course of a day or two along the parkway. So it can be a really awesome place to hone your bird watching skills. There are a lot of birds out there. And especially during the breeding season, they're advertising that fact through singing and their behaviors. Ruby-throated hummingbirds are always popular, and right now is a great time. They're gathering up to think about migrating. It's one of the interesting things about birds that, they have these, we were talking before the program started, there's so many layers to their behaviors and their biology. Ruby-throated hummingbird is one of the most popular birds around. We get so many calls in the spring about why are they back, why are they not back, why are there fewer, why are there more than there were last year, all those questions. But they're an interesting bird because they have what's known as differential migration. The males leave before the females leave, and then the young of the year, the ones that were hatched this year, leave last and follow their parents usually a couple weeks later. So August here, mid-August, the males are starting to leave and gather at the Gulf Coast across the Gulf of Mexico. Females will follow soon, but right now, if you find big patches of jewelweed in bloom along the Blue Ridge Parkway, stop and watch for ruby-throated hummingbirds because they love jewelweed patches. You will see tons of hummingbirds, especially during the peak of migration toward the end of this month, using the parkway. Another bird that's nesting right now, our last nester, is American goldfinch. So if you want to get out and see still some birds feeding babies and actively nesting, it's one of our last nesters. Most birds are finished in June or early July. But goldfinches time their nesting for when all of the composite seeds, all the sunflower type family seeds are going to seed. They're one of our few kind of vegetarian birds. They don't feed their young a lot of insects like a lot of our birds do. And so they really wait until that food resource is available. So anytime between now and mid-September, you'll find goldfinches nesting. And they're plentiful along the parkway, especially again in these kind of openings, view sheds, overlook parking, and also any of the ag dominated parts of the parkway. Now, breeding season's great, right? Like rose-breasted grosbeak. This is an animation from Ebird records that shows the migration of rose-breasted grosbeaks. You know, they spend most of their year outside the US, mostly in Central America, and migrate through. And in fact, 75% of those birds you're going to encounter on the parkway in the summer migrate away for the winter. That's a lot of birds leaving, right? And so migration is an important time in the Appalachians. Most of our birds here in the Southern Appalachians overwinter in Central America, the Caribbean, and a few in the northern part of South America. A couple of our birds make even longer distance treks than that. So the bobolinks I mentioned earlier, a grassland bird, go all the way to the grasslands of Argentina and South America. Even some of our barn swallows migrate all the way down to the tip of South America and basically get to Tierra del Fuego, turn around and start their way back. So a lot of our birds take pretty long and arduous trips of migration. But the Appalachian Mountains are an important part of that. Their general orientation, kind of north east to southwest, kind of favors the direction that most of our birds are going and may have actually helped determine that that's the direction most of our birds are going. A lot of our birds are going to fly over the Gulf of Mexico. And just to give you a quick tip, you know, songbird migration, most of our songbirds migrate at night. They gather up about 30 minutes before sunset and take off and fly through the night and then land in the morning. And a lot of research has been done on nocturnal migration in songbirds. In the morning, there's kind of a corrective flight where they're looking for a good place to spend the day and eat. So it's important, you know, the timing of when you're out on the parkway can be important. Most of our birds that are breeding during the spring and summer are going to sing the most in the morning. So if you want kind of maximum diversity that you can hear and see, earlier is better. The early birder gets the bird and the early bird gets the worm. But even in migration times, early is usually best, although the birds will be active most of the morning while they're foraging after flying all night. Then they'll rest in the afternoon and it gets kind of quiet. And you've probably noticed even this time of year, even though a lot of our birds might still be here, they're not singing as much. The need to sing and defend the territory and stuff is over for most of our species. So they're not singing as much. It doesn't feel like there's as many birds out there right now. So timing, both seasonally and time of day, is also important to kind of maximize what you can hope to see. And some of that migration is fairly regular, right? We're left with species that are going to spend the winter with us, for instance. You know, things like eastern bluebird, wild turkey. There may be several other species that, you know, Carolina chickadees, think of kind of your typical feeder birds, tufted titmice. They're going to be here year round. Some birds are going to join us for the winter only, like white-throated sparrow, for instance, is a winter resident with us. But we'll have our cardinals, our downy woodpeckers, our hairy woodpeckers, pileated woodpeckers, all these kind of permanent resident birds. But there are times of the year when we get some interesting birds, some birds that we don't see all the time. One of the birds folks visit the parkway for are red crossbills, and they can erupt or be around the parkway at any time of year. In fact, a lot of times nesting for crossbills up in the spruce fir zone occurs in late fall, even October. We had another documented nest in North Carolina last October as well. So, you know, the movement of these birds is quite seasonal for a lot of them, but for these crossbills, there's a few reliable places like Mount Mitchell, Grandfather Mountain, Linville Falls, where you can find crossbills most any time of year. At other times, though, they're moving around like a lot of our other migrant birds. So the Blue Ridge Parkway, even though we think of it as a forested landscape, gets a lot of other migratory birds. We'll see wetland-based birds like great blue herons kind of any time of year, but shorebirds come through like this spotted sandpiper at the bottom right. Shorebirds will use the parkway. Usually the peak is in April and then again in August. Raptors like this osprey at the top, we have a really strong raptor migration in the fall. along the Blue Ridge Parkway and through the Southern Appalachian. So a number of spots on the parkway are permanently kind of volunteer staffed observation points for hawk migration. Mahogany Rock up in the northern part of the parkway in North Carolina, Rockfish Gap, Grandfather Mountain, Mount Pisgah. There's a number of sites along the parkway that that host annual volunteer efforts to count raptors moving through. And sometimes those numbers are spectacular. It's not uncommon to have 10,000 broad-winged hawks in a day at some of these hawk watching locations. Typically, broadwings are our most plentiful migrant, and the peak is around the third week of September. So if you have an opportunity to be on the parkway that third week of September, always look up for these big kettles of hawks, as they're called, where they tend to travel in groups and soar overhead. Also, you can usually hit the websites of local Audubon chapters and others and see where these hawk migration counts are occurring. We put a few links in the chat on a few resources, which we'll talk about in more detail in a minute, but there are a number of organizations that deal with birds that are active along the parkway, like the Hawk Watching Association of America. We also get migratory waterfowl, especially in October, November. If there are places along the parkway like Julian Price Park, Moses Cone Park in North Carolina, there's a few spots in Virginia with decent sized lakes or clusters of lakes. You'll often get waterfowl as well, and sometimes in pretty good diverse numbers. I've seen up to 8 species of ducks on Price Lake, for instance, in Western North Carolina on the same day. So we do tend to get some diversity. Those habitats are fairly uncommon in the mountains, and so the ducks that are flying through, tend to find them and use them. It's not like at the coast where there's water everywhere. And so it's hard to find sometimes concentrations of waterfowl. But here in the mountains, they definitely use these spots along the parkway. Now, there's a few resources that can help you find birds, especially if you've been a birder for a while and you've got some birds on your list that you want to find, for instance. The Ebird, which most birders are familiar with and a lot of birders use to log their checklists, has a series of hotspots, they're called, where folks nominate or report checklists at specific locations. The Blue Ridge Parkway has literally hundreds of hotspots already logged into Ebird, where you can click on that hotspot, search for it by name, and see a list of what's being seen there. You can also search by species. So if you want to know where people are seeing worm-eating warblers along the parkway, you can type in worm-eating warbler and then search the parkway for those birds. So it's a great tool to help you kind of hone in. If you're just starting, and a lot of folks are just getting into birding, the COVID pandemic actually has driven a lot of folks to be more interested in birds. We've seen about a 10% increase in eBird usage and in folks who are identifying themselves as bird watchers kind of post-COVID. The last 18 months or so. So it's a great time to get started, and really all you need is a decent field guide, a pair of binoculars. If you've got it, there's some really nice brands in the kind of mid ranges, $200 for a pair. You can get $30 Tascos at Walmart to get you started. I used very cheap binoculars for a long time because I mostly bird by ear, but binoculars are a great asset and a great aid to help you see the detail, because a lot of times you need that to identify the bird. There are a few other resources specific to the parkway that can really help. The best is this Birds of the Blue Ridge Mountains by Mark Simpson. I think we're putting a link in the chat so you can kind of find this book. It's great. It has lists for most of the trails, parks, nodes along the parkway, and places near the parkway. Both Virginia and North Carolina have birding trails, which are an assemblage of sites that are kind of grouped by geography that welcome birders. A lot of times they have posted signs that identify the site as a birding trail stop. They both have websites dedicated to these efforts, and we'll have links to those in the chat as well. But there are a number of sites along and near the Blue Ridge Parkway in both states. It's a great resource to help you find places that are, are open to the public, accessible, but also some details about what you might see there. The other thing I would encourage is to get out of your car. The Blue Ridge Parkway is great for having access, as we said earlier, but you also have a lot of access on foot, which will really help you get closer to these birds. I threw up a slide here of the Mountains to Sea Trail in North Carolina, but both states have a number of trails that either follow the parkway or take off from the parkway. Spend some time out in the woods listening and watching. You'll find that you will be rewarded with an amazing diversity of birds as you go along the parkway. Again, elevation is really important. So the more different elevations you visit, the more different birds you'll see. The individual habitats within the forest and across the landscape. So make a stop at those overlooks to see those gap species. Make a stop where the forest is deep and dark. Make stops along those ag fields and wetland systems, and you'll really see a different array of birds. So spend some time. Again, a lot of resources out there to help you find the birds you're looking for. Ebird is great, but both states also have ornithological societies or bird clubs, the Carolina Bird Club, Virginia Ornithological Society, that have websites that will also help you find birds. A lot of them have posts about the rare stuff that's being seen. So there are a number of resources out there to help you find and locate the birds you're looking for. And with that, I'd like to just encourage you to get started. I think a lot of times as an Audubon person, a lot of folks are intimidated that if they go on a bird walk with an Audubon club, they're not going to know enough. Don't feel that way at all. Get started, take the plunge. Most birders I know are eager to teach and eager to help people really enjoy the wonder. This is a blue-gray gnatcatcher on its nest. Looks a lot like that hummingbird nest, made with spiderweb and lichen and little fine pieces of grass. The more you watch them, the more you'll learn, and the more you'll become fascinated. My grandfather got me started bird watching, and he's really the reason that I like to know why they're doing what they're doing, even more than what kind they are. And there's a place for that for folks who really aren't interested in ticking off a list, but who really like to watch nature. And birds give us that chance. As I said in the beginning, they're the most accessible group we have. And they will go a long way toward showing you kind of the wonders of what's happening out there around us all the time. So keep all those things in mind: elevation, habitat, time of year, time of day, and you'll have a great experience on the parkway. It's a jewel in the crown of the Southern Appalachians. We love the parkway. It gives us such great access. So thank you very much, and we're going to open it up for questions and answers.
Curtis, thank you so much for the presentation. This was so fabulous, and what a great selection of resources for those of us that bird a little bit, or those of us that just want to get started. And we only have time for one question. So somebody wanted to know, what is the most rare bird you have ever seen on the Blue Ridge Parkway?
Oh, great question. So I would have to say that it was an accidental bird, as they call them, one that doesn't normally occur here. I found a first state record for Townsend solitaire at Grandfather Mountain. I was looking down at the parkway and saw a Townsend solitaire, which is a Rocky Mountain specialist. We think they were having a lot of wildfires out there, and he flew east until he hit the first patch of spruce fir he could find. So.
Well, Curtis, once again, thank you so much. And just as a reminder to everyone, we will have this recording available, the transcript available as well. So thank you all so much for joining us on this month's edition of the Insiders Report. And let's all go out and bird on the parkway. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you so much.